Sexuality, or perhaps sexual activity, is as old as man. As human evolved, man has continued to devise means for sexual pleasure. While some of them are true to sexual conventional practices, some are not. All right, Dr. Ekunwe Williams, it's nice to have you on our show this afternoon.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much. So
Thank you too.
You look nice.
Thank you.
Okay, so there is this thing about sexuality generally, sexual activities and sexual pleasures. So can you just help us through light on sexuality generally, sexual activities, and then you could just talk about anal sex as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Sexuality, generally speaking, has to do with the way an individual expresses his or her sexual desires and sexual preferences and all that. Is a quite a broad term, so to say. It encompasses a lot of things and is usually influenced by a number of factors, which could be there are social factors that can influence an individual's sexuality and the way he or she expresses it. There are psychological factors, even biological factors, etc. So sexuality can be expressed in a number of ways. Some persons would prefer a male to female kind of relationship in terms of sexual relationship.
Let's say that's conventional now, right?
Conventional, okay. Exactly. Others, we have heard of, we must have heard of the gay, yeah, lesbians, bisexuals, and other form of sexuality. So, okay, that's where you also, the issue of anal sex or intercourse come in, okay, for some persons. So that's essentially it.
Okay, Doctor, we understand that the conventional way of sexual expression is the male to female kind of sexual expression.
Yes.
Over time, we've seen sexuality evolve from one form to the other. And that brings us to one of the major issues we're talking about today, and that's anal sex. So what would you say about anal sex?
Well, like I said, anal sex is just one of those ways an individual can express their sexuality and derive sexual pleasure. Okay? And it's something that has always been with humanity, so to speak. It's just probably because of the the involvement of internet, awareness. People are more aware, and all that is coming to the limelight. So that's why right from the time being, I mean historically, if you do your research properly, you will find out that the issue of anal intercourse, gay sex, homosexuality, is something that has always been with humanity. Okay? So anal sex, simply put, intercourse through the anal route. Okay? Can be between a man and a man to a man, or a man and a female. Yes. So penetrative intercourse using the anus as a route is what is called anal sex. And it's something that has always happened, and just that the society is becoming more aware of it.
Okay. So like sexuality is as old as man. So
yes,
the anal sex is as old as man.
Definitely.
Okay. So we, Doctor, still talking about sexuality and the way they are expressed. I think people know, our audience know, almost everybody knows that there are safe ways of expressing sexuality, and there are also unsafe ways of expressing sexuality. Can you throw a light on the safe ways of expressing sexuality and the otherwise?
Okay, safe sex essentially implies or entails engaging in sexual activities in such a way that it doesn't become detrimental to one's health and well-being, whether social, psychological, mental, or otherwise.
True.
Okay, that's safe sex. So while unsafe sex is when an individual, in the course of engaging in sexual activities, become predisposed to certain risk, and which can be detrimental to the individual's health in terms of social, mental, psychological, and even physical health too.
Wow.
So that's generally what safe and unsafe sex is all about.
Okay.
Yes. So any step that is taken to ensure that in the process of expressing your sexual or having sexual activities, your health is not put in the line. Okay.
So, under which category we do categorize anal sex?
Well, I would say I would categorize it under unsafe sex. Talking from the medical angle. Okay. There are reasons for that, because it's a known fact that anal intercourse poses the greatest risk to an individual in terms of the risk of contracting sexually transmitted infections.
Wow.
Is higher.
It's higher.
Yes, with anal intercourse. And the reason is the lining, let me use the word, the lining, or what we call medically the mucosa.
Now of the anatomy.
Yes, of the rectum, of the anal rectum, the anus and the rectum. Is not really designed for sexual activities. Okay. So it's a very thin layer that ordinarily is meant for expulsion of feces and flatus, that's gas. Okay. But when an individual now engages in anal sex with such a vigorous way, usually there are injuries.
Wow.
Tears in the those lining of the anus and the rectum.
True.
Which predisposes the individual to being at more risk of contracting sexually transmitted infections. There are quite an array of them that an individual could get through that process, contract through that process.
All
so,
right.
unlike the conventional vaginal intercourse, where the lining of the vagina is specifically physiologically designed for that purpose. The vaginal is the way it's in terms of anatomy and physiology is able to cope with such an act, in that there are glands, there are layers of the mucosa which can withstand such the acts of having intercourse, unlike the anus, which is just a thin lining and can easily tear, and a variety of injuries can easily happen. Okay?
Because I think I understand that in the vagina there is a secretion that could, aid friction.
Lubricates.
And that's absent in the anus.
In the anus, of course. Then not just that, the mucosal lining of the vagina is thicker. And more resistant against injuries that could result from intercourse.
All right. Thank you so much.
That's the physiology. That's how it's designed.
Yes. Thank you so much for that categorization. I understand that you're doing your residency, like you're a surgical resident.
Yes, I am.
Okay. That's like a disclaimer now. Of course, I understand that you're not a sexual or reproductive health specialist.
Yes.
Specialist, okay. But in your times, in your during the time of your residency now, have you come across cases of anal complications or anal sexual complications over the time? And just opposing that with some of the risks and dangers of anal sex. I understand you had already talked a bit on STIs, like sexually transmitted infections, that could result from anal sex.
Yes.
Can you throw more light on more dangers and risk of anal sex?
Okay. Speaking from the angle of a surgeon, the anal sex actually can result in a number of injuries. And the truth is, no individual will actually come to a doctor and be so open about some of these things, okay? But if you are able to win the patient's confidence and with your clinical skills of being able to elicit certain signs and symptoms, you could tell that whatever a patient may be or a client may be presenting to you with maybe as a result of complications coming from, arising from anal sex. Vis-a-vis, specifically, engaging in anal sex can result in tears, yes, in the anal region, what we call fissure. Fissure in anal, that's a medical term. It just simply means tears. For instance, I'll give you an example. There are times if one is constipated and for some individuals, they don't take a lot of fibers, fluids, and all that. You get constipated, and in the process, you press yourself to go to the to defecate.
That's quite funny.
Yes, sorry. No. It's just the same scenario.
I'm reminiscing.
Yes, it's the same scenario. So sometimes some individuals in the process of doing that can suffer some tears, which is what we call fissures. It can be quite painful and very excruciating.
Sorry,
yes.
Very painful.
So the same thing applies to having anal sex. Especially we all know what sexual intercourse can be, how vigorous it can be, and all that. So such an individual may suffer some injuries to the anal rectum, such as tears and other injuries. Some can even result in bleeding and all that. Wow. So again, there are sphincters, natural sphincters, which help to control an individual's the way we defecate.
Wow.
So such that help us to maintain continence. What that simply means that you can hold your physics. You can say, oh, in the next, even though I'm pressed now, I can hold my physics. I will not defecate in the next 2 hours.
Especially when you are in an
environment that is not convenient. For an individual that may have engaged in anal sex over time, such sphincters may become weakened over time. Yes.
Okay.
And that can predispose the individual to developing some form of anal incontinence, in quotes.
Wow.
Over time. Yes.
So the person just defecates anyway.
Not necessarily.
But there will be difficulty
in
holding.
Yes, to some extent, because the sphincter over time can become lax.
And continuous anal sex could lead to
of course damage, if the repeated injury over time, the body heals. There's over time that happens. Before you know, the sphincter can experience some level of weakness or damage that can lead to some form of incontinence.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. So those are really high risk and dangers,
of course,
of anal sex. Just so that people want to have sexual pleasure. So Dr. Williams, having established some of the dangers and risk factors associated with anal sex, can you throw more light on the sexually transmitted infections that are associated with anal sex, probably anerectal dysfunction generally?
Okay. there are quite a number of sexually transmitted infections that could be anal sex. Infections such as gonorrhea,
Wow.
yes, syphilis,
Wow.
hepatitis B, human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, yes, chlamydia, okay, genital warts,
Wow.
okay, and quite a number of other infections, yes, that an individual could contract via anal sex, especially regardless of whether or not an individual using some form of protection. You know, the issue of using protection
Yes.
also comes
Yes.
into play, whether you are using a condom or not. Regardless of that, infections transmission can still take place, and the risk is higher with anal sex than vaginal intercourse.
Wow.
Okay, and again, if an individual contracts some of these sexually transmitted infections, it can predispose to, in the long term as a complication, it can predispose the individual to developing certain kind of, let me use the word lesions in the anorectal region,
Okay.
such as even anorectal cancers, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, can result, yes. There are certain infections an individual can contract. Actually, the infections, the human papilloma virus, even the HIV virus, can predispose an individual to developing certain cancers. Okay.
Wow.
Yes.
So that's quite a lot of danger associated with anorectal sex. Doctor, finally, sadly, we're coming to the end of this show. Would you want to give advices, like counsel, to people who are thinking of engaging anal sex, whether male, whether female, just general counsel? What would you want to tell them?
Okay. Well, we all have a right to our sexuality, yes, and how we express it. Then, like we said, in the process of expressing your sexuality, it shouldn't put you in danger. You shouldn't put your health at risk. Okay. It's better to avoid anal intercourse for the reasons we have spoken about, and for individuals that may be engaged in it, you even if you do that, you should practice some form of safe sex in that regard. For instance, individuals having intercourse anally without a condom, and another category of individuals that have intercourse anally with condom. Okay. On a general note, the practice of anal sex is one that's discouraged generally because of the health risks that are involved. Yes, and again, in the practice of anal sex, there is the element of being safe in it also. For instance, whether you use protection or not. So an individual that probably engages in anal intercourse and uses protection may, to some extent, be a bit protected from some of these infections, even though that doesn't guarantee total safety or lesser risk in contracting some of these infections and all that can accompany engaging in anal sex. Okay, so but generally, it should be avoided. The society as it is now, there are a lot of maybe because of the level of exposure, the content we now see in social media, internet, and all that, a lot of person wants to just experiment.
Try, yeah.
So, but in doing so, yeah, like we said, there could be physical, psychological, social consequences to some of these practices. a lot of them can be quite disadvantageous to the individual. Even couples that want to even experiment and see how it is, it's not, it should be discouraged. Okay.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Sadly, we've come to, that's all our time can take for today, and thank you so much, Doctor, for joining.
You're welcome.
All right, people, you heard all that the doctor have said. We have conventional ways of having sex. We have unconventional ways as well. And of course, there are safe ways, and there are also unsafe ways of sexual expressions. All right, there you have it. We've had the doctor share so much on anal sex and how unsafe it is to engage in anal sex. We want to hear what you have to say about the topic today. Please drop your comments on the comment section, and don't forget to follow us on our social media handles on VOX TV, on YouTube, on all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And until I come your way next time on Healthy Living on VOX TV, my name is Michael Erayami. Continue to keep living healthy. Bye-bye.